Just want to first start off by thanking everybody who's joining us to the latest installment of our CCNMA webinar series from Fresno State to the New York Times, Breaking into Journalism and Thriving with Manny Fernandez, the New York Times bureau chief in Los Angeles. But before we turn it over to Manny, I want to have everyone know that we're going to be taking questions. And so if you got any questions for us, please submit those via the chat. I'll be monitoring that, and we'll get to those at the end of this discussion. You know, with Zoom, it sometimes feels like we're far away, and we want to try and make this as interactive as possible. So really, please submit your questions, and we look forward to interacting with you as best as we can that way. Events like this are made possible in part through the support of CCNMA members. So if you're not a CCNMA member, please join. And if your membership has expired, please renew. I've put a link to the membership page in the chat. So if you right click that, you can open up to the page. And for students, we got a deal for you. We've waived membership fees. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic, has inflicted a lot of financial and economic hardship on our communities. And we know it's been tough, especially for our students. So we've waived the fees. We don't want you to worry about that. We want you to join CCNMA. We want you to take advantage of the programs we have, like this one today. So please join. The membership fees are waived for all students. That's high school and college students during the pandemic. CCNMA, as many of you know, was founded in 1972. It was the first organization for journalists of color of its kind. It was started by a group of journalists in Los Angeles shortly after the death of Ruben Salazar, the famed LA Times columnist and KMEX TV news director. And next year, we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. So be on the lookout for ways to get involved. It's going to be a milestone. And that's 5 decades of making a difference, 5 decades of job fairs, 5 decades of professional development workshops, and 5 decades of awarding scholarships, hundreds of thousands of dollars in scholarships, I might add, to students, thousands of students who've gone on, many of them, to stellar careers in journalism. And one of those former students, I'm proud to say, is with us here today in his car, like a true bureau chief. They're ready to report, ready to talk from anywhere. So, yeah. Man, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And so right now at this moment, I don't have my bureau chief hat on. I have my dad hat on, and my son had a water polo event. He didn't want to miss it. I didn't want to miss it. And so here I am in the car. So it's fine. The car is not moving. So we're good. And I'm good to go. So thank you for having me.
Manny, I'm especially pleased to have you. You're a CSU grad. Manny went to, first of all, let's just say that Manny was raised in the Central Valley. Born and raised there in the city of Fresno, and he went to Fresno State, a proud Bulldog. He studied journalism. He graduated from Fresno State in 1997, landed his first job at the San Francisco Chronicle, and Manny began to shine immediately. He did a series of stories in the late 1990s at the Chron. One of them looked at homeless youths who were living in the Haight-Ashbury district, and that was such an impactful piece that the Chronicle submitted that for the Pulitzer Prizes. A guy like Manny obviously wasn't going to stay there for long. He catches the attention of news organizations, national news organizations, and he ends up at the Washington Post, where he immediately made a mark. He was only there for a few years, and then in 2005, Manny went to the New York Times. Early on, once again, he stepped up. He was part of a team of Times reporters that covered this devastating fire. I believe it might have been 2007. And 10 people from West Africa died in this blaze. And Manny was part of a team of reporters that was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize by the New York Times for their coverage. And that story was a finalist in the breaking news category for the Pulitzers. So no small accomplishment there. That was just absolutely big. And Manny wasn't destined to stay in New York. He joined the national desk. And I think for nearly 9 years, or a little more than 9 years, Manny, weren't you the Houston bureau chief for the New York Times, covering all things Texas?
Yep. Yeah.
And now you recently came back to California, and you're the LA bureau chief. I'm just wondering, what does a bureau chief do? Could you tell us a little bit about that? And what's your routine like? And I know it
We,
can vary, but if you give us a feel for that, I think that'd be really great.
thank you. We sit in our car on the weekend days while our kids go to water polo. Um, I'm the Los Angeles bureau chief. I'm in a kind of a different new hybrid role. As one of the reporters here said, I'm a player and a coach. So I both write and I edit. And so I cover Southern California as any other reporter. I'm looking for stories, I'm looking for features. And then at the same time, I'm also editing most of our California reporters. We have several here throughout the state, and I'm their editor for most of them. And so that is a new role for me, is editing. I've been a writer most of my career, and I love it. I love this new job. I love being able to write a little bit and edit a lot. And I'm learning a lot, and I love working with reporters. And basically every day we're looking at California. What happens in California? What does it mean? Where is the state headed? What are, the serious things happening? What are some light and funny things happening? I edited a piece recently where one of our reporters interviewed Arnold Schwarzenegger for 3 hours at his home. And we just had a lot of fun with that story. It was
That was
just
a great piece. Could you tell us about that? I mean, it looked at either things that were large, oversized, or things that were tiny in Schwarzenegger's house, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it was Sean Hubler was the reporter in Sacramento who did that story. And it was great to sort of to be an editor. You're sort of the advocate for the story. You're the editor. You're the guru. You're the kind of the champion for it. And it was just a fun piece. We decided that we wanted to have fun with it, and we did, and it showed through. And from the headline all the way down, we try to just we try to just have fun with it, which is part of what I think a bureau chief has to do, is that we have to cover the news, say what it means, but also capture the spirit and humanity of a place. That's what I tried to do in Texas. I tried to capture the spirit of Texas, both in the stories you do and in how you do them. And so that's what I try to do in California too, which is a place I love.
And as the bureau chief, it sounds like you're doing a lot of editing. Do you find much time just to do stories and go out there and actually report? And are you even going out there and reporting with COVID-19?
I am, yeah. I'm not doing it as much as I did before I started editing, but yeah, I am going out there. I want to do that. That's one of the things that I think helps keep editors sharp, is to stay out there and to actually be out on the ground reporting and talking to people. I did a piece where I was the Times was granted access to an East LA funeral home during the height of COVID in LA. And that was it was a very hard story to do. It was very grim. And that was an important story that I wanted to work on, and that we did. I was in there in the back rooms in the funeral home. We went to a bunch of funerals, and I did a story that was just kind of looking at how devastating that was, how unusual it was for one funeral home to be dealing with so many bodies, and what all that meant. And to write kind of a human tale of this largely Latino and Latina community that was just being devastated from COVID, and to try to capture that in this one place. And so that was an important story for me, and one of the biggest stories I did when I first got to LA.
Yeah, I think I do recall that. And I think that's how I knew you were here, because I knew you were coming, and then that had been delayed during the pandemic.
Yeah.
That was an interesting piece because, as you say, that was sort of your, as sad as it was a reality, and is still a reality. But it was an interesting way to look at, the Latino community in California, which, as we all know, has been devastated, by COVID-19 disproportionately. And that sort of leads me to this issue that I think all of us journalists who are also Latinos often sort of confront in our careers, sometimes repeatedly, or at least one time or another. What do you feel your responsibilities are as a journalist who happens to be Latino? And I know we all have responsibilities to the higher calling in the profession of journalism. We've got to report accurately and fairly and all of that. But are there any things in particular that you sort of see as being a reporter who also happens to be Latino?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Um, yeah, I think I try to make sure I bring a certain mentality, and that mentality may not necessarily be, I'm looking for only Latino or Latina stories. It's more about like I'm looking to do stories that capture like my own like upbringing and the neighborhood where I was born and raised in Fresno. And I'm wanting to make sure basically that there's like a working class mentality that um, you know just so many people are just struggling with just the day-to-day stuff. um you know I, it's sort of bringing a mentality of like I don't want to just kind of bring like an Ivy League mentality, right? I don't want to bring a kind of upper crust mentality, because that's not how I was raised. That's not where I'm from. That's not who I am. And so I want to I want to make sure that with the stories that we're doing stories about how the working class live. And if we're doing a story about a big issue, then I'm going to want to look at how it affects like ordinary people, like the people that were from, my community and my neighborhood where I'm from. And you kind of can't do that with every story, and you maybe even shouldn't. Not every story has that kind of element to it. But I think that's what I try to bring is I try to make sure that I'm going to want to hear from people who otherwise would never be in the New York Times. And I think that's a big part of it is that I'm looking to interview people like in their living rooms. And I know that, if I didn't have that idea, then they would never be in the New York Times. And I want them in the New York Times. I want people to read about their lives. The people whose families were impacted by COVID and they were, dying in East LA and they were dying at a high number. I wanted their individual stories to be read around the world. That is important. I want to make sure that what's happening in that community is just as important as what's happening in Beverly Hills or in some other community. And that was that's kind of what I try to bring. It's more of a mentality than anything else.
And do you feel you've been successful in doing that at the New York Times where you're at now, and even to a
I hope
lesser
so.
degree, the Washington Post?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, yeah. It's really, uh, I mean, it's that mentality has kind of defined my career. Definitely at the New York Times. I covered the Bronx when I first got to the Times. I did a story about a homeless man who was schizophrenic, who was living in an abandoned train tunnel. He was essentially living in a cave. And that's one of the first stories I did, was I
Yeah.
kind of go into that cave and hang out with him and write about his life and who he was. Um, I'm just kind of always looking for, I don't want to just do stories where you just kind of sit in your office and interview experts about something that's happening. I kind of wanted, that's why I got into journalism, was I wanted a front row seat for history. And like what I consider history is a broader view. It's not just like, George Washington and World War II and everything else. Like it's about like real people living their lives and making sure that we're recording that history of their lives. I think that's an important thing that I've just always tried to do that, ever since, working at the Madera Tribune.
Well, let's go back to those days. Now that you raise the Madera Tribune, tell us about your early life. I mean, how you even became interested in journalism, for starters, what you did, going to Fresno State, and sort of what got you into the business to begin with, basically.
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, I'm doing right now what I always wanted to do. And I don't know how it happened or what I did, but like this is pretty much all I've ever been interested in doing. I was the editor of my 8th grade newspaper, the Sacred Heart Vikings. I want to say it was called the Viking Times, and I was the editor of the 8th grade newspaper. I went to San Joaquin Memorial High School in Fresno. I was involved in the paper there. While I was in high school, um, I was part of a Dow Jones Newspaper Fund Fresno Bee program where it was like a summer program where they took a bunch of high school kids interested in journalism and you got to make your own newspaper. So there was like a little staff. We worked in the Fresno Bee newsroom. We got to put out this newspaper, and I did that when I was in high school, working at the Fresno Bee as almost like an internship, and that had a huge impact on me. Just going into the newsroom every day, we got to talk to reporters, and that like solidified. I kind of thought that I wanted to be a journalist at that point. That really just solidified it. It was just fun for me. I remember shadowing this reporter as they went to the courthouse to like look up these court documents, and it was all just kind of fun. It was like he was like a detective, and that feeling, Robert, when you have an inkling of a story's happening, and you go and you're pointing over the records, and boom, you find the document that you're looking for, and that kind of seals the deal. It was just fun and exciting, and I loved it, and it never really left after that. So from high school, I went to Fresno State, studied journalism. I started working at the student-run newspaper, the Daily Collegian. I started, and then when I was at Fresno State, an internship at the Madera Tribune opened up, and they picked me for it. And so while I was a student at Fresno State, I was working part-time at the Madera Tribune. And that, again, that was my first real newsroom. And it was just like, it was wonderful. It was amazing. And from the Madera Tribune, I got a couple other bigger summer internships while I was at Fresno State. I was a summer intern at the San Francisco Chronicle before I graduated. Then I was a summer intern at the Wall Street Journal in LA. And so, I just kind of, that love of journalism, it's never left. And I just got bit by that bug, and it never really left. I think, and part of it is like, I want to write. I love the writing of it, telling real stories about real people in a dramatic way. Because I think that life is dramatic. I think that one of my journalism books has a little saying in the back of it, and it says, "Who needs fiction in a world this strange?" And I really believe that, right? It's the capturing of the everyday drama of life in the newspaper. That's really what draws me to do this job, mixed with this kind of front row seat of history, a front row seat of American history and of like a people's history. That is what makes me want to do this job. It's just, for me, honestly, there is no other better job where you get invited into people's homes. You get to capture them at one of the most dramatic moments of their lives. You're writing about them. You're writing about the issues that are affecting the nation on a daily basis. And you get to tell these people's stories. Like, there's no other job for me that's better than this. There really isn't. And I'm biased that way, but
Yeah, that's interesting. You bring up an interesting point, though, about your sort of early career. And somebody in the chat has given us a shout out. Jefferson Beavers, I think, said that Dow Jones Minority Journalism Workshop was also in partnership with CCNMA.
yeah.
People
And let me mention, during that really quick history, while I was at Fresno State studying journalism, I think maybe I'd started at the Madera Tribune. So I'm really like kind of feeling like, okay, this is it. This is my career. Um, in that time, I think I got 2 CCNMA scholarships.
I believe
Uh,
you did. I
I
believe
thought one of the questions in the,
1999, maybe?
no, it would have been between 93, maybe 95. I got 2 CCNMA
Let
scholarships.
me share something, Manny. Maybe this will jar your memory. Let's throw it back here. Recognize anybody there, Manny?
Oh my God. Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, this
Who
is
is
from an
that?
old CCNMA newsletter, everybody. This is in the Biltmore, I think, isn't it, Manny?
I think I'm wearing like Harry Potter glasses before Harry Potter was wearing Harry Potter glasses. Yeah, that is me. That's my mom, and that's my brother. That was a big deal. Was going to that event. What year is that? Is that 90?
That's like 1998, or when did you graduate from Fresno State?
No, I graduated in 97.
Okay, so that's got to be probably around 96,
Gotta be.
97. This is from we used to do a newsletter, and the guy on the left of you is also a Fresno local,
I
Al Ray.
remember Al. Yep. Yeah.
He was
Yep.
a
I remember
journalist,
Al.
a TV journalist, and also Fresno State Bulldog, proud alum.
Yeah. Al was great. He helped me out so much. And I was just gonna say, like, you know, if I can appear here today to just say thank you, because you have no idea like what it's like to have like an organization just kind of give you a little nudge,
Hmm.
just because you're not sure how it's all going to work out, right? I mean, I wanted to be a journalist, but it didn't mean that it was going to happen. Wasn't in the cards. I mean, who knows what happens, right? Um, and to sort of get that institution to just kind of give you a little thumbs up, and not worry about tuition that year meant a huge deal to me, and my family. And for my family too, it was sort of like, everybody knew I loved journalism. Everybody knew, but like having CCNMA kind of say like, here's a little scholarship. It was a big deal to my family. And so I can't thank you guys enough. So if I can be here for this to tell everybody, you know, I literally am walking proof that you can do it. Um,
Absolutely.
and I don't, I never, all this state school business, like I've never, like, you can do it. Like, I don't care where you go to school. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if you have the talent and you just love it and you want to do it, you can do it. I mean, don't let anybody ever tell you like somehow, like, because you go to CSU, whatever, that you can't do it. Like, I am living proof that that is not true. If you focus on it, you do it. Like, I'm living proof. Like, like I didn't come from, the greatest neighborhood. Like, we didn't have, I didn't have any silver spoon. Like, it just, you know, but like none of that matters. It's all about like you and what you bring to it and what you want to do. If you want to do it, you can do it. And so if I can say that, please.
Yeah, and for everybody in the audience, Manny brings up a wonderful point. All of us along our careers have had people who have helped us, who've reached out, and none of us got here on our own. Manny got here with help from CCNMA and many other mentors. And for you young people in the audience, one day you will be successful. And the only thing we ask is that you never forget where you came from and you always give back, like Manny's giving back today, taking time off on a Saturday, in between water polo with his son to talk to us. And so this is the community that we bring together with CCNMA. This is what CCNMA has been all about for, as I said earlier, 5 decades. And Al Reyes, by the way, was one of the co-founders of the Fresno CCNMA chapter, and I failed to mention was an executive director of CCNMA for a number of years. So, please join if you're not a member. And as I said earlier, please renew if your membership has lapsed. That link is in the chat box. Manny, we've got a lot of great questions, and
Yeah, let's go.
there's
Yeah,
an interesting point about the CSU. You are living proof that the CSU provides a quality education, and in the field of journalism has launched many people, including colleagues of mine at the LA Times, and CCNMA members, and Lori Ochoa, the current president of CCNMA, Nancy Rivera Brooks, a CSUN grad who was a business editor at the LA Times and was part of the 1984 Times team that won a Pulitzer Gold Medal for their coverage of Latinos, in California, in Southern California. She's a CSUN grad. Did you ever, early in your career, as competitive as it was, experience what we know as imposter syndrome? And by that, I mean feeling like maybe you didn't belong. And if so, how did you deal with that? And if not, why not?
That's such a good question. I wouldn't call it imposter syndrome. I never felt like an imposter, but I definitely, there were times I definitely felt like an outsider. I definitely felt like, can I do this? Do I have what it takes to do this? I mean, that constantly feeling like it's not really an imposter. I wouldn't use imposter, but I mean, I remember there's two moments that come to mind. One is that I remember, so I remember being at Fresno State. I remember driving on my first day at the Madera Tribune. So this is me, like I have a couple of daily collegian clips under my belt. The Madera Tribune has taken a roll of the dice and given me a chance to be a full-fledged reporter. I remember driving from Fresno to Madera, and I literally remember thinking, this is a mistake. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I have no idea what to do. I made a huge mistake. I remember feeling like I need to just call them and say, I'm sorry, I can't do this. Because I felt like I didn't have the tools. Like at that moment, literally at that moment, I remember that fear. I remember that fear so well. I literally thought I could not do this. I'm not ready. And, I lied to myself. Like, yes, I'm ready. Like, I'm ready. Like, especially in journalism, like journalism is this place where it's like you are more ready than you think. Any story can be written under any circumstance. If something were to happen right now, I could sit right here in my car and start writing it and filing a story. If if you think you're not ready, you are ready. That's just a little bit of doubt in the back of your mind, telling you like, oh, maybe not. And journalism, journalism is so great because at least in my journalism career, you always have to write your story. Like whatever happens, you go cover it. You still have to sit down and put words on your computer screen. And that having that one little skill, that will set you for whatever you want to do. You want to do a blog? Do you want to do an editor? Do you want to have your own podcast? Do you want to cover something, write something? Do you want to do investigative? Do you want to do sports? Do you want to do features? If you can sit and put those words on the screen and care about them, then you're set. You can do whatever. You can work in the Madera Tribune. You can work in the New York Times. It doesn't make a difference. Do you have that little skill that says you care about the words that are on your screen? Then you're set, and you can do it.
Thank you. And we have a question from a young student out there from Cal State LA. He's asking, what were the best lessons that your editors taught you before you became an editor?
Oh my gosh, there's so many. There really is so many. There's a saying that you edit people and not copy. The meaning there is that an editor has a reporter who's working on a story, and the discussions that happen between the editor and the reporter before the reporter even starts working on it or makes a single phone call, that is as important as any line editing you're doing at the very end. So the connection you have with your reporter to talk out the story, how are we going to do this? What should you, how's this? What's the framing of our story? What's going to make it different? Like, what is it? Like, what's the story about? And to have those discussions happen between the reporter and the editor, that is where the story narrows and it has a focus. And then the reporter goes out to do the reporting, and then those discussions continue. And it turns out, hey, that does work. That's right. But that one thing we had where we thought we were going to do this, well, it's not really accurate. It's not really there. So let's drop that, but let's still focus on that because that was a good idea. And so you keep going. And then so by the time the reporter turns in the story, it's already pretty much kind of what you wanted, and you're just kind of fine tuning. So it's this idea that you're like, you're the rabbi for that person on that story. You're trying to guide them. You're trying to, figure out like, well, that doesn't work. And, don't do that because somebody else last week did a story that was too similar. So it's this idea of like editing people more than the actual story, that's where the heart of it happens. That's been invaluable advice to me.
So you're almost like a coach, really, and maybe
Very
even
much.
like a mentor of sorts.
It's the discussions that happen before the reporter even starts reporting or writing. And even after the reporter does the reporting and they come back to you and they're like, hey, here's what I found. And before they start writing, again, there's a discussion about like, all right, what do you think your lead is? And they're going to talk it out. It's going to be like, hey, I like that, but don't do that part because that kind of doesn't work. But what about, and you kind of have that exchange of ideas so that way, by the time they write, they feel like they've been guided to like, okay, we knew what the reporting was about. Now I know what the writing is about. Because for everybody, I don't care if you're at the Madera Tribune or the New York Times, when you're the reporter and you're the writer and you're sitting there after working on a story for a week or a month or one day, there's always a little bit of like, what am I going to write? What is my lead? There's always a little bit of this like, does this work? Like, and that's what makes journalists so good, I think, is that all the best writers I know, they all have this like complex where nobody thinks they're any good. Nobody thinks the story that they did is any good. Like everyone, that's what keeps people kind of sharp, is that like this, like almost this like complex where like nobody thinks that like that they're good enough. And I don't know what it is, but it keeps people wanting to drive for excellence. Because once you get there and you think that you know it all and you've got it all figured out, you're done. You really are done as a journalist. If I got to a point where like I was in Texas covering Texas for 9 years, and if I got to ever a point where I thought that like, oh, I knew this, I know it, no, forget it. It's Texas. I know it. I can do this. Like, no, like I didn't. 9 years of Texas, like Texas was its own like big mix of like, of, all these trends happening. And California the same way. There's no way I can sit back and be like, oh, I know California, I'm gonna start writing it. Like, no, like California is always changing. Like there's not one California, there's like about 20. And I'm always learning. And so you have to keep that mindset of no matter how far you rise, you don't have it all figured out, because it's journalism, and journalism is about life, and it's always changing, and nobody has it all figured out.
That's excellent. The whole thing about the changing nature of journalism, because that segues into the next question that I was going to ask. And it's actually a very good question. Do you have any tips for being innovative with story ideas? Sometimes it's hard to keep things fresh. So true. What can you share about that, and what advice might you be able to share?
So true. I mean, it's something I literally think about every day, for my own story ideas and for my reporter story ideas. I don't know where I would begin. That's like an hour discussion.
I'll let you condense it down to
yeah,
5 minutes. How's that?
I'll go quickly. Think outside the box. Just always think outside the box.
What do you mean by that? I mean, I hear that all the time. And
no, yeah, like every story you should think about, like, what are we going to do differently? How can we say this differently? What is unique? I mean, there's sort of a saying that one of the editors at the New York Times has, where this is this idea that every story should be that's only in the New York Times story. Like every reader should be like, oh, I can only get that in the New York Times. There's something unique about it. And so it's this real rigor to focus on what is unique, like what is really new here. Like if you feel like you've read this story before, then move on to something else or change the angle. Like everything has to be new and fresh. There's got to be a way to do it, to find what is new and fresh. And that's the trick, and that's hard. The other thing is, I would say, is that a great story is not about a subject. It's about something happening within that subject. So in other words, like if you say, I want to do a story about the homeless. Well, like that is a subject. That's not a story. That's a big classification of a lot of different stories we could do. But if you say, I want to do a story about a guy named Johnny Five who's addicted to crack and schizophrenic and has been living in an abandoned train tunnel in the Bronx for a year, but whose only sort of savior is this streetwise, cussing nun who wears jeans, who gets him to help her and pulls him out of the cave and gives him like a reason to live. And this relationship between the two of them is touching and funny and heartfelt. And that is the story. Like that's okay. So we've gone from story about homelessness to a story about like Johnny Five struggling and having a relationship with this streetwise nun. Like that's the difference, right? It's like zeroing in and narrowing in on what is that particular thing that makes this one story unique. I guess that would be my advice.
And that's certainly one story you did early on. One of the people in the audience asked about your early stories, your favorite feature stories, and mentioned something you wrote about odd characters at Coney Island. And would like to know if there's anything that you can tell us about your most famous early feature stories and how they've sort of stuck with you.
Oh my God, there's so many. I loved covering New York City. I absolutely loved it. Again, I was like a kid from Fresno. I could tell you about Highway 99 and all this other stuff. And like, here I am, in Manhattan, like looking for stories. And like, it just, my mind was blown on a daily basis. You could literally stand on a street corner and do a story. And so it's the stories that are a little funny and off kilter that stick out to me when you ask. And probably because like maybe the New York Times has this reputation of being stodgy and it's not an accurate representation of the Times, because I can point to specific stories that I wrote that I never thought before I wrote them and they were published, that I thought that the editors would go for it because they were so just kind of funky. And one of them was, I was walking in Brooklyn and there was some flyers on a light pole. And it basically said something like, "Have you seen my pants?" And I ended up doing a story about a guy in Brooklyn who lost his pants and just what the heck that was all about. And it turns out that this young man lived in Brooklyn, like a aspiring writer and like actor, producer, goes to the dry cleaners, holding it over his arm. He's walking down, the pants slip out. He doesn't realize it till he gets where he's going. Well, it turns out that that's the suit he wore at his wedding. And he really wanted his wedding suit like back. And so he stuck up all these flyers. I went over there and interviewed him. And it was a story not just about this one guy losing his pants, which it was, but it was a story about all the things that get lost in New York. And so I remember calling different museums and asking them to tell me what is in your like lost and found. I remember researching and so in that story, there's a whole thing, a section about how people lose things in New York and what that means, and how it's all just like random stuff unless it's yours, and then it means something to you. And so again, like totally funky story. I had a lot of fun with it, and I wanted to say something about New York, which is that things get lost and sometimes like they mean more than you think. And so that's been one of my favorite stories. It just randomly comes to me. And I actually, my kids know it because I've read them that story because we've just had fun with it. And my kids know about the story Dad did about the guy who lost his pants in New York because I think it's kind of funny. And so that's one of my ideas.
That's a great story. And while we're on the subject of great stories, I'll let everybody know that prior to the start of the panel, Manny and I had been in communication. And one of the questions I asked Manny, and I said, I know this is a hard one, but is there any story or stories you are most proud of in your career? And Manny actually pointed me to one, and I'm going to put this on the screen, Manny. There's actually two. If you could talk a little bit about those two stories and why they are probably among your most, you know, prized ones in terms of you being proud. Just bear with me right here. Let's see, that's the wrong share. Share again.
Water glasses again.
Yeah, there we go. Let's see. Oh, right here. Can everybody see that? Poignant paper trail. You see that, Manny?
Yep, I can. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, great. So then everybody can see that. So this was the sidebar to, I believe, this article, correct?
Yeah. So I can explain this a little bit as you scroll down.
Migrants who died,
Yeah.
their names unknown, and you've got skulls here.
Yeah. So go ahead and keep scrolling and it'll become more self-explanatory.
Oh,
Essentially, this is a story I did about how many migrants die as they try to cross the border of the United States. Specifically into Texas. And there are so many, and it is such a problem, a crisis.
A mass disaster, as you say here in this subhead.
For years, I wanted to do this, and it took a long time to sort of figure out how we were going to do this and what was involved and the different angles of it. And it's essentially a story with like 5 little vignettes from different parts of South Texas. And it's all about how people at that time, this is like in 2017, and again, others had covered this story, but this story is essentially about people not realizing just how many people have died trying to cross the border and how many of these people are unidentified and how their bodies are treated, how their remains are treated, who has found them, and who were they as they crossed. You know, it just, it was an important story for me to write about people who are literally dying to become American. You know, yes, they were coming, you know, illegally into the border. But the idea that so many thousands of people could have died over the years and America just kind of moves on, I found was stunning. You know, one of the quotes in there is from one of the experts saying, and I can't even remember what the numbers were at the time because those numbers are now higher. And I can't remember at the top what the numbers were, but it was like all these thousands of people that have died in the span of, I don't know, maybe like 8 or 10 years, thousands, that if that many thousands of people had died in like a plane crash or some act of terrorism, that it would be a huge disaster story. And that's what this was. This was a disaster story. It was about just how many people have died and who are they. And I just thought that it needed a larger platform to talk about who these people were and why they were important and what the stories were behind it. And it just was important to me. It just, again, it was for me, it was the idea of people dying to become American, to capture some bit of that American dream. They were literally dying from dehydration. They were getting lost as they crossed. The coyotes that they were paying to escort them across were double crossing them. Women were being sexually assaulted during this whole process. So it's just an important story for me that I felt like in my time in Texas, I had to do this story. It was too important. And then there's a little side note on a little other.
Right here, right?
Yeah, this is the sidebar. And essentially, it's about a thank you note that I learned about while working on this story. And essentially, it's about this thank you note that I wanted the whole thank you note to appear in print because it was from these anonymous migrant girls who crossed over the border. One of them was pregnant. They needed help. They busted into a little ranch house. They did laundry. They called the Border Patrol because they needed help for the one who was pregnant. And then one of them wrote a little thank you note in Spanish. And it's the poetry of this note where she says, thank you and 1,000 times sorry. It just was so touching to me
Yeah, it
that
was. Let me read that, Manny.
yeah,
Here, so for people who know, I'll just give you the quick background. It's three girls, one of them pregnant. She's in trouble. They kick open the door of a cabin out there in the brush in Texas. They find a note with 911 numbers, immigration, and sort of a call list. So they wash their clothes, they call in immigration, and they turn this note around and they write their thank you note on the back of this paper. And so it is he talks about one of the girls there, and one of the girls removed the pins holding the phone list to the bulletin board. She turned over the piece of notebook paper and wrote a letter to the cabin's owner, from a foreign stranger to an American one, amid a sweeping and politically charged movement of people across the border. On a slip of torn and creased paper, it was the smallest and simplest of things, an anonymous thank you. Quote, sorry for entering your ranch, but it was out of necessity because we had 4 days of being lost, she wrote in Spanish, adding, quote, sorry for destroying your door and for having used your belongings. If we would not have arrived here, we would not have been able to call immigration. Thank you, and 1,000 times sorry. God bless you. Close quote. I thought that was so moving and so telling in the sense that it brought it down to the level of human to human in this massive tale of the ebb and flow of border crossings. That I'll be really honest with you, as a journalist myself, I often view it just from statistics. And I'm not happy to say that, but that's true. Border crossings up X percent, arrest down X percent. But it's stories like this, at least for me, that really bring it home on that human to human level. I mean, what were your thoughts about that, Manny?
no, that's exactly it. I don't always succeed, but this is what I try to do. This journalism is about like explaining these big things happening in our lives and going down to the human level. That's what I try to do with every story. Like everything is just, how do we make this? This is about people. Like people are dying. Like people are like, and people are leaving like thank you notes. People who are perceived as crossing the border illegally and they want something from America, and you know what I mean? This whole stuff. And here's this girl just writing a thank you note. And it just was so powerful that I just wanted like the note in, it was just so moving to me. Because again, it's that humanity. Like we're always trying to find the humanity. Like maybe the story is about like Obamacare. What is the human tale in that? Maybe it's a story about like, the private prison industry. What is the human like drama? COVID, vaccines, um, police brutality, right? Like it's always should be about like, how does this affect real people? And how can we bring this down to that human level? Like, it's just what I'm always trying to do. It's a struggle. Like I never feel like I fully do it. And that's what I wanted to do. I just, again, going back to this mentality that I try to have, that I try to bring to it. Like I wanted like these girls' lives to be in the New York Times and their actual words, right? Like there was such a poetry in those words. It was so moving that just for us to publish the words of this like anonymous like girl, it was so important to me, right? It just like there was a power there, more than any op-ed, more than any editorial that could have been done, more than I could have done. Like just the power of her words. Again, it's that bringing that mentality of like, well, like, because I almost like was a little bit like, I don't know, can I do a whole story about a letter? Can I do a whole story about a thank you note? And I don't even know who wrote it. And I tried to figure it out, but couldn't. like, can we do that? And that, I guess it goes back to this idea of like, when I say think outside the box, like that's what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
Like, let's do a whole story on an anonymous thank you note that was found in South Texas. Like that is like, let's really like, how can we really like do this differently? And that's what I try to do.
Yes, that was amazing. And someone asked to post that in the chat, the link to that story. So I
Yeah,
have
thank
the link there to that sidebar, and from that sidebar, you can get to the main story. So if you're interested, um, please look at that. Um, how did you learn about that letter, Manny?
Oh, it was so great. I love the story. I'm going to try to give it briefly. Um, every reporter is only as good as their sources. Uh, the source development is a fancy phrase for every reporter should just make sure that they are in touch with people, having coffee with people, uh, making sure that they are connected with people. And so, long story short, one of my sources was a former governor of Texas, a guy named Mark White, who passed away a few years ago. I would have lunch with him all the time to just kind of learn about Texas, having him, again, a former governor of Texas, trying to tell me like about Texas. And we'd have these lunches all the time. And then one day separately, I had a coffee with another source. And that source said, oh, by the way, did you know that the former governor like actually found human remains one time when he was out hunting? And I was like, really? And I said, like, I have lunch with him all the time. We talk about all this stuff. He's never mentioned that. So after that coffee, I called him or texted him and I said, did you like find human remains once? He's like, oh yeah, like I'll tell you all about it. Here's the phone number of the ranch manager who for the ranch that we had rented. He'll tell you all about it. Called the ranch manager. It's that ranch manager who's had the cabin with the note. So I say all that to say I learned about it from the sources I knew and was trying to develop. But it's this roundabout way of like, it just never hurts to always like be talking to people. That's what's so hard about being a journalist during the pandemic, is that it's harder to do that kind of stuff now. Because
And not
before
that
you did
you
it,
need him, of course, but just chat him up on a regular basis, I would add, correct?
like, yeah. And it was also a reminder of like, even though I'm having lunches with him all the time, like it still didn't come up. I took another source to tell me like, hey, did you know that so like the more you talk to people, the wider your net is cast. Coffees, lunches, people that you don't even think have a story in them, they probably do, And so like as a reporter, you should be always just like talking to people, like off deadline, just to try to get what you can. Because it's those connections took me to the letter.
Did the ranch, just very briefly, very quickly, we got about 2 minutes left. Did the ranch manager, what was his reaction to the note, and what did he feel about people crossing his property all the time?
He is in the main story. So when you read the
Oh,
main story, he's one of the ranch managers that I hang out with, because they had found so many remains on his ranch that he took me out there and showed me other bodies that he has found personally.
oh, wow.
And so he had a very, he had sort of this like sympathetic view. I mean, it was a job to him in the sense that he was running the ranch, but he did realize the humanity of that letter, which is why he saved it. And so when I went out there with him and we were touring, at one point I was like, can you take me to see the letter? He was like, sure. And so we go to the cabin and we go in, he takes the pins off the bulletin board and turns it around and says, here it is. He kept it.
Wow.
I think that like, it was the kind of thing where like, he didn't just like crumple it up and write up a new, here's the number to call for Border Patrol and all this stuff. He kept it because it meant something. He knew what it meant. And the former governor knew about that letter too. Everybody knew about the letter because it was so moving that they were like, the hunters and kind of the wealthy, kind of mostly kind of white folks who would come in there to rent that cabin and go hunting, they all knew about the letter because it was that powerful. It didn't take me long to kind of learn about the letter and to see it. And the fact that he saved it kind of talked about what it meant to them, that it did mean something. Again, this anonymous girl's letter just had this like impact. It's just, that's what, if I can bring that little story to the world, then, the CCNMA scholarship was worth it, right? That one little thing, like, let me just do one thing. And that's what I focus on a lot. If I can say this, if you want to go over, that's fine. But like it's the old cliche about like the forest and the trees, right? Like I'm always trying to write about the tree. You have to write about both. You have to write about the one tree, and then you have to write about like what that means about the larger forest. Because again, that story about the letter was about the letter, but then it also was about this larger human movement of people across the border. That's what I try to do, is to try to write about like one tree of everything happening. There was a lot that happened during COVID. I wanted to write about one funeral home in East LA. And I wanted to plant myself there and be there and really soak it up. And that would be my advice to the young journalists out there. There's a lot happening in the world right now, a lot happening in America. Like, look for one story. I tell you, like my kids end up inspiring me more than they know as a journalist, because the other day they were watching Justice League, and there's a scene where I have not even seen the whole movie, but this one thing stuck out. And there's a scene in Justice League when I guess it's like Flash is nervous about going into they were going to do some mission, and he's nervous about it because it's his first one. And Flash asks, I think, Batman, what should I do? And Batman says, save one. And he's like, what? He said, save one person. Like, as a journalist, like, write one story about one person dealing with something, going through something, one family, one hospital, one building, one town. Like, narrow it down to one. And there's a power there, because the world moves so fast and there's so much happening in our country right now, that if you as a journalist slow it down to just one, and instead of like save one, I'll change it to like write one, write about one person, one hospital, one community, one store, one business. There is a power there, and it lingers. And that's the power of that letter story. It's about one letter that happened. There's so much happening on the border. It was one letter. And if you keep doing that, that builds a body of work that can't be denied.
Well, Manny, that was all really wonderful. Thank you so much for taking the time from your busy day to talk to us. Folks, this will be recorded. It'll be on the CCNMA website, our Facebook page and our YouTube page. We've got a lot of feedback today, Manny. Everybody loved it. I was glad to participate myself.
Robert, feel free to put my email in the chat. And if any of the young journalists, they want to talk, they want advice, they want whatever, I'll give people as much time as I can. Like, I'd be happy to.
It's Manny F, right?
Yep, mannyf@nytimes.com.
Manny F, put that in the chat, everybody.
mannyf@nytimes.com.
That's Manny F at
nytimes.com. Yeah.
So for you young people in the audience, put CCNMA in the subject line, because Manny gets a lot of emails every day, I'm sure. And if he sees the CCNMA, he'll know it's from one of you people. But that's what we're here about. We're here to help you. We're here to, be role models, but we're also here because people helped us get here today. Manny didn't make it on his own. I didn't make it on my own. Nobody who is successful in the business has made it on his or her own. And, for us Latinos, CCNMA has been, for me and for Manny and for so many others, hundreds of others, an important part in helping us succeed. So let's all remember that. Let's give back, and let's not forget where we came from. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Manny. You all have a nice day.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Thank you.